Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is a first for myself and Sarah, and I'm just going to start my video, so hopefully that you can put a face to a name. So, Sarah and I have been working together in the sector for probably longer than we can even remember due to our age. And so hopefully this is a discussion where we can look at maybe what the future holds, maybe what's triggering some change in our sector. So the idea of this is for me to have a conversation triggered by some questions with Sarah on this issue of the remote technology transfer office. Maybe we should start with that, Sarah. What do you think we mean by a remote technology transfer office?
That's a really good question. In some ways, it's something that we've done ever since we started the business. So I joined in 2006. So I really am the longest serving member of the company. And our first clients were actually asking for what was essentially a remote technology transfer office, a blended offering, which would help them turn themselves into an expert technology transfer office of their own. So a lot of the work we did was remote, but we also had a sort of blended offering whereby we met face-to-face on a fairly regular basis and went to their research groups. Back in those days, then, we had a sort of remote / face-to-face TT offering. And as things have gone on, we've had some clients who've insisted on face-to-face work all the time, but the majority have increasingly asked us to start working with them on a remote basis, because you don't actually need to be around in the office with people all the time. So I suppose that's where we are now. We've done a certain amount of work internationally, providing technology transfer support and building up offices from their own base to turn them into their own offices and to turn them into mature organizations. We've done some work in Cyprus, we've done some work in other countries. And that was much more of again, a blended training technology transfer offering with a certain amount of remote support focused on specific projects.
Okay, right. So hopefully we're clear on what we mean. It's and let's cut to the chase, right? What do you think has triggered this interest in us in exploring more the delivery of remote tech transfer support, to take it almost to an extreme? It's a loaded question, right? But let's put it out there. What is driving us to push further and explore further into this concept of remote support in technology transfer for academic communities, for institutions?
I think while there's been a drive for more remote support over the past few years, because we're all trying to reduce our travel, for example, the big driver in that loaded question is undoubtedly COVID-19. It's, for us as an office, it's caused a sudden and immediate change into the way that we operate with any tech transfer partnership, internationally or nationally, in that everything has become remote. And that's been the big trigger to us as an office understanding what we can do and how we can take advantage of that remote presence and how our clients can take advantage of us.
Okay, it's kind of obvious we're all being forced to work remotely.
Yeah.
And let me go back to basics, right? When we think about how historically and traditionally we have offered, the sector has offered support to the academic community it's always been face to face, right? It's always been from people that belong to that organization. It's the University Tech Transfer Office. Do you think there are any components of the entire process of technology transfer support to academics that are too difficult or more challenging to deliver remotely?
I would say that almost everything can be delivered remotely, but as we all know, knowledge exchange and commercialization is always described as a contact sport, as a communication activity. And the part of it that maybe gets overlooked, or is most likely to be overlooked if you're only delivering remotely, is the part where you're building your pipeline. So it's that socialization with your academics and your researchers. That's the part where you're, as an organization, you'll be building trust. You'll be building trust, you'll be building a relationship, and you'll be gaining the academics' trust in essentially handing over and working with you. And I think that's the part that's most difficult to be delivered remotely. If you've already got a project in a pipeline, if you're already working on it as a tech transfer office, then COVID has shown us that with the right tools, with your Zoom, as we're using right now, or other tools, you can still do the face-to-face meetings that you need, where you're not losing all the body language. But that really early relationship, when you're developing relationships with academics and you're actually really understanding what you have, that really does work best face-to-face and in person, I'd say.
Yeah, that's great. I've got a question here already, and John Frazier, who's calling in from the US. Thank you for your question. This is exactly the point, I think, in the discussion where we want to open this up to everybody. This is about knowledge sharing too amongst the community, and we're lucky enough because maybe we have that profile. We're lucky enough to have some international contributions here. And John asks, what personal response issues do you need to be more sensitive to when working remotely? You know, we're all working remotely, and all technology transfer practitioners are having to engage, even though they're from the same tribe, if you like, the same institution. They're all having to manage and develop relationships, collect disclosures remotely now. Do we have any guidance of some of perhaps the softer side of this that we need to be more sensitive to when engaging in that early stage of the process?
I think firstly, hi John. I met John a few years ago, so it's really good to hear from you via Tim. I've found in terms of the process over the past month or two in particular, specifically with the complete remote working, it's been a couple of things. One is being aware that everybody else is probably just as slightly more tired than usual as you are, because turning off when you're working through Zoom, turning off when you're working in your home office is not as easy. So actually taking care of your own energy can be not as easy. And if everyone is in the same circumstance, you have to be that little bit more patient. So in terms of personal response, and also in terms of my experience has been that with meeting etiquette, for example, the usual things you would do if you're chairing a meeting, a remote meeting is harder to chair. A remote conversation when you're looking at actions, when you're looking at what you're doing next on a particular project, forgetting to do those things, which is always a bad thing to do, is easier when you're rushing from meeting to meeting because you haven't taken the time to rest, because people are...
Sarah's frozen. We've just had a question on challenging internet access issues. So I guess we're experiencing those now. I'm sure she'll be back. Hey, Sarah.
I am back. The other thing to be aware of is that your home Wi-Fi is not always that brilliant.
Yeah. Yes. We just had a comment on that very issue, actually, just before you froze. All right, can we flip that on its head, right? Can we turn a negative into a positive? And I think I think we would all agree that there are challenges of not being able to deal face to face, not being able to, those of us who are experienced in working with the academic community, the weakness we face of not being able to develop the trust issues and the relationship side of that, which is so important when we are trying to support academics and also trying to do deals. Is there any way we can turn that on its head? Are there any positives, particularly on that side of the process, engaging with academics at an early stage, maybe even engaging with the market? Are there any positives of the situation we're currently in, which may force us to do more remotely?
I think from the point of view of both, as a provider that works in the southeast of England, which is where we're based, from the point of view with working with our clients all over the UK and remotely, even though it may seem like a small thing, just the fact that you are no longer traveling, just the fact that you're not flying places, just the fact that you're essentially not wasting carbon. You do have more time if you manage your time properly, is a huge plus. Also, as a person working remotely from an internal office, let's say, we as a sort of third party don't have to deal with all the internal politics, shall we say, axes to grind that may be going on within our client office. So having a remote supplier is quite useful for just specifically on those projects that are very much projects, areas where you are focused on delivery, you are sold. So things like looking at the market, getting engaged with the licensees, these kinds of activities can be done quite easily through remote working. And you can actually spend more time on them potentially if you're managing your time correctly. And okay. I do think, because as someone who last year I traveled, I had far too many long distance flights last year. You as well, Tim, will have traveled to Chile, to Argentina. I went to Thailand, Vietnam, various countries. A lot of time that could have been spent doing other activity, providing support to clients in those countries, was spent on planes. So I think from a personal point of view, there are some huge pluses to working remotely, so long as it's that thing that really doesn't require face-to-face. And the other area where we're working is actually providing more training through the likes of Zoom. And that we're learning about as well, because that actually changes massively from going face-to-face to remote. The way in which you do it changes, because the way in which humans learn.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I've got a really interesting question here. Right, are you ready? I'm going to read it out because I haven't vetted this yet. It's a bit like one of those terrible radio shows. There are known biases with how millennials and other generations prefer to communicate, i.e. in person, over the phone, via text or email, with millennials preferring communication via messages. Have we noticed any differences in how clients communicate based on their age? And if there is some differences with preferred methods of communication, are we suddenly going to suffer, or is the demographic of the academic community that we're engaging with going to change if we are stuck at home for quite a long time trying to work remotely?
I think it's almost like, I mean, there are two different questions there. So one, the first one being the way of communication. The good thing is that in a way, I've been trained by working with Tim. Tim is a brilliant communicator so long as you know how to communicate with him, which for a while, for me, I didn't realize WhatsApp, WeChat, these things were the way of communicating with Tim. But for a long time, we never actually communicated with each other at all, until I worked out you as the tech transfer person have to be able to communicate with the people you're talking to, however works for them. So I have definitely noticed that, especially working with entrepreneurs in some of the places where we work. If I work in China, it's WeChat. That is the way to communicate. And yet there are some of the other professors in China will always be email. So yes, I mean, it is different, and I am noticing that difference. Working out how people communicate best is a key part of the job, I would say.
Okay.
That's one thing.
Thank you. There's quite a few questions. I'm keen to try and keep up because I've got a few of my own as well. So there's a question here about, yeah, you know, it's a bit easier to stay in touch with people that we already know because they're existing relationships and people have a little bit more time perhaps. But how do we go about approaching new people, right? I mean, we've also got a bit more time on our hands because we're having to work remotely. Do we have any tips or advice for people about, you know, people aren't going to conferences anymore. They're not making those initial connections to new potential partners and industrial partners and collaborators or potential licensees. How do we keep that area of activity going?
I think that's a question probably for everybody in the group, everybody who's listening as well as you and I. Just in terms of working within our own office, I've discovered that actually having a scheduled approach to light-hearted communication is massively important. Actually taking the extra time to plan in the extra meetings with people that you know. With the clients that I work with, I'm aware that if I'm not careful, I will lose touch with them because of the remote working. So I'm checking in that much more often on a more regular basis. And the interesting thing is, for me as a human being, I'm not a huge fan of the video camera, but I've discovered that if you actually put yourself through it, it is much better to actually have the camera switched on, as they say, when you're having your meetings with your friends, even though it might be easier not to. I'm discovering it's been incredibly rapid, the way in which different, let's say in the UK, practice oral, in the US, autumn, in the UK, in terms of some of the large conference activities that I used to go to, they all have gone online incredibly quickly. Everybody is changing the way they work in our sector massively quickly, but we're all at the beginning of that process. So
yeah. I mean, I might add to that, coming from the perhaps more of the commercial end, as is my job in the business. You know, I like to think that this provides an opportunity, perhaps an improved opportunity, to engage with new partners, because we're all being forced to communicate more on a one-to-one basis. So to connect to people, there are more limited channels, and maybe people are therefore more receptive to those channels because they're stuck in front of their computer and perhaps more likely to interact with LinkedIn rather than ignoring it and just going to conferences. Okay, I've got another question here from Simon Cutler, who we all know.
As do you.
Thank you for joining us. Simon's in Reading. Simon's going to look a bit more into the future, as we all are as the days go by. And you know, Simon makes the point, and I hope I do him justice here with his question, that how do we maintain momentum? Because we don't know what the future holds. And there's going to be impact in the public sector. There's going to be impact in the private sector. There's probably already impact that we can all feel in the early stage investment sector. So what do we have any advice as to the strategy that tech transfer managers should take? And you know, this might be a bit more focused on COVID rather than remote technology transfer office, but it's an interesting perspective here as to what the future holds and how we should perhaps change our strategy in order to keep delivering for our academic communities.
So, a small question there from Simon. I mean, it kind of ticks off a few thoughts in my head. One of which is obviously around the immediate need in many of the offices that we know, where they're suddenly active around research and innovation that is directly related to COVID impact.
Yeah.
We know that. So that's one thing. It absolutely is leading to some very, very busy offices in the UK and internationally, from what I know, talking to very, very busy colleagues. The other things are large questions in the more medium and longer term around engaging, I think, still with the funders, engaging where the research and innovation funding is going to go, maybe being as early stage as possible. We don't know how long this particular circumstance is going to last. The one that we're all in right now of social distancing and lockdown. I'm slightly concerned that you've frozen, Tim, or you're just not moving. Okay. So I think in terms of an office, you're looking to maintain, to focus on what you can in terms of delivery aligned with the impact of COVID in particular. And actually, like with any company, longer term planning for the future, not putting that kind of activity to one side. And I think we've lost Tim.
Yes, sorry, this is Ajita. I think Tim has dropped. We can address another question that's come through the chat box, Sarah, if that's okay. We have Anil from Chile asking, how do we deal with uncertain times with trying to license companies that are suffering flow cash problems?
I think I might look to the licensing terms as I would, for example, to a spin out that was coming from my own university, in that it would be, I would still want to see those license deals going through, but not yet related to actual cash payments, for example. So as we would with any spin out that was coming from a university, you would wait before you actually start to take revenue from that spin out until it is established. I would do the same thing, essentially. I.e., I would be patient as a university. I would still do the spin out, I would still do a license, depending on the quality of the potential licensee and the possibilities of that particular technology. And I would be less concerned about the immediate short term. I would hope also that my economic system was supporting that company.
Thank you, Sarah. Anil, I hope that answers your question. As we wait for Tim to tune back in, I guess this is actually giving us a good insight into all the problems and challenges that people experience while working remotely. Is it okay if we go on to read another question before Tim is alive? He's just messaged me separately, but we can ask another question and then let him come back to the room. So we have someone from Colombia. So working in the public sector, which mechanisms can we offer to support technology transfer offices during this time? So this is really asking for advice from a public sector perspective. National Ministry of Science is the employer of this user. Thanks for the question, Nelma.
Well, I guess one thing that I've noticed in the UK has been that it's the underpinning support to the university system that is incredibly important here, in that uncertainty can lead to a lack of action. So it's building certainty and confidence, I would say, within your knowledge exchange office or your research innovation office, that they are not going to essentially have their funding withdrawn by their own. So essentially it's just the confidence to carry on working. And that is often a financial confidence. I think that is something that I would say is obviously happening, in that universities are trying to maintain their own economic position. And we usually, a tech transfer office is a part of a larger organization. Tim, it's nice to see you.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Can I
Okay, Tim, you might want to turn your video off. Jitya?
Hello, I have tried to hide Tim's video to help him with his connection. I hope that will do the trick.
Oh, he's back, maybe.
Can we all cheer for Tim to come back?
There we go. Come on, Tim.
Come on,
I'm
Tim.
back.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
back.
Tim. We are not going to share your video because it might help your connection. Is that okay?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely fine. Ajitsia, you may have to ask the questions. In fact, you can ask them to both of us because I can't see previous questions because I lost the connection.
So we covered a few as you went, and thank you everyone for your patience. So we have one from Christian, also in Argentina. Which tools and processes that are being developed during COVID might remain useful after the lockdown is over?
So is the question what sort of tools could be useful?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, Christian, I think your guess is as good as ours. I just make the comment that the rules of any game have changed. And I think that we in the innovation space have an enormous role to play now in helping the world get back on its feet in obvious and non-obvious ways. So although we may find that we are all struggling with our funding and operations in the public and the private sector, we shouldn't forget that we play a critical role here in a COVID response, particularly in supporting our academic communities. Sarah, do you have anything to add particularly there?
Yeah, I would agree. I would suggest that we have as much of an opportunity as any to engage, as you said, with the funders around the fact that not only the tools and systems we're using, especially things like Wi-Fi and Zoom and these kinds of systems, these undoubtedly will be used more going forward. This will produce a change, but we don't know how much of a change in the way in which we do our work. But I think they will undoubtedly be used more. But then in terms of the actual influence on the research and the potential for more licensees, the potential for more of the end users being interested in the research that's coming from our universities, that maybe it was hard to build a case for before. I think that's something we have to keep an eye on, because I think that will change because COVID is highlighting how the world needs to change. possible.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, again, my glass is half full here, that, you know, maybe this provides a wonderful opportunity for our sector to showcase how innovation can have a huge impact in trying to help the country and economies get back on their feet. And I'll add one thing to that, and that is that whilst we all work really hard with our academic communities trying to do deals and see impact, we really do need to make sure that there is flexibility within our institutions to allow those impacts to happen. And our institutions must not hold us back in bureaucracy at a time when time is not on our side, but opportunity perhaps is to see some impact.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'll read another question if that's okay. We have John who asks, how can we speed up the normally lengthy process of technology commercialization in order to maximize some of the opportunities that are thrown up by the COVID crisis? For example, there are Formula One teams working with universities in the UK to develop new ventilators in the market within weeks. So how can we as technology transfer professionals help speed up the process?
Wow, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think for me, that makes me think of the things that tend to slow up the process, that are therefore being not put to one side as much, but made more efficient, because we have to make them more efficient. And that seems to be around the area of partnership, and John has raised that with the question of the Formula One teams. A lot of university and industry and private partnerships exist and are developing amazing innovations, and that's one of the ways in which the UK funding model's changed in the past 5, 10, 15 years. For the knowledge transfer people, I would suggest just speeding up the bureaucracy, minimizing the bureaucracy, as with any similar circumstance, making sure that risk is still being mitigated, but the systems are much, much simpler. And yeah, getting people working face-to-face with Zoom or similar systems should help with that.
Yeah, all those, sometimes those niggly problems, those preconceptions maybe are out the window a bit more now, and it again provides us with an opportunity to not get bogged down and to move things forward. But you make a very important point there, Sarah, about also managing risk, because we're still dealing with early stage tech, and there are still many risks associated with that. Bridget's here.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then I'll let Tim ask more if he has more for Sarah. So Majda asks, would you be able in your office during this short period to notice the impact of social distance in the number of disclosures? So has the social distance already impacted the work that you do?
I think that's a really interesting question. And for me, it is such a short period so far in the UK. And I think it does tie into that very specific point, that the one area where we could have issues is the fact that we don't have that social interaction the way that we have had in the past with the researchers and the academics, because we're having to schedule everything. I know from my experience that I'm currently working on projects that came through into our pipeline before social distancing started. We've had interest from some of our clients. So some of our clients are still having researchers saying, I've got this great idea, I'd like to do this. But I think it can't help at the moment but cause a few delays in areas that are obviously not specifically focused on technology and research that actually applies to the COVID situation. So I think that more face-to-face, maybe slightly more reactive way of having more projects coming into the pipeline may be delayed, but it may also encourage us to maybe be a bit more proactive and strategic around the funding that we know is being put into research, so that we actually just start contacting the academics rather than the academics contacting us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Those are just thoughts.
Jitsia, I have a couple more questions if you don't have any more questions on your side.
No more question on the chat box, so please go ahead, Tim. Thanks.
Okay. So Sarah, if you were advising with your inside knowledge a remote technology transfer support service provider, anybody out there who was looking at offering that and delivering that, what tips would you give them in order to make it work? What do you think are the important points in order to be able to successfully deliver the best value in remote technology transfer support?
So I'm going to sort of look at this as though COVID isn't happening. So let's have a world where we don't have COVID, but we do maybe have more remote support or more international support, let's say. First thing I would say is make sure you really do have very good teleconferencing and videoing systems and very good communications. Because as we know, they can make everything take that little bit longer. So make sure those work. Make sure it is face-to-face as much as you can in that way. Ensure that you are even better in what you've always done as good project management. And by that, I mean, you know, classical project management, classical meeting management, all the activities that we've always done when we're proceeding projects through a pipeline or through a funnel to a license, making sure that we're just doing all those things with that little bit more extra care and maybe slightly better records, because you don't have the opportunity for the 5-minute catch up. And finally, don't only go to a remote surface, because I think that you lose the socialization, you lose the familiarity with your researchers. So something blended is great, but you don't want to lose your internal people, because they're the people that have those relationships, maybe more than the people in the remote office will have. The remote office can be going out and finding you potential clients, potential licensees, doing business cases, all these things. You don't want to lose what you have in-house. You just want to improve the way that they work together.
So just as a follow-on to that, do you ever see a scenario whereby a technology transfer office for a university is completely virtual? That there are no staff there at all? That they're all in different locations? Do you think that could ever work?
That's a massive question, in that, if we look at all the sort of practice and theory over the past 10 to 15 years, where place is always seen as being very important. If we look at what happened and has happened in France with the SATs, which better than I, Tim, where you have a core hub technology transfer office that's working with, let's say, 19 different universities. What is it that made that work where it worked? So I'll put that one back to you, Tim, because that in a way was its own virtual office to an extent.
Well, I think one of the great lessons we learned from that experience, which is a kind of version of what we call a hub model, which some of us believe is a natural progression in the evolution of our sector towards a hub-based model, because it often doesn't work that every institution can justify a full complement of a technology transfer office. But the key struggle from that experience was engaging with the academic community. You simply can't do that from HQ located in another part of the country. The academic community wants to engage with its own. and its own people understand how to best engage and support those academics. So, you know, I see added value, and I'm sure you do too, and you've witnessed it and delivered it, added additional value of remote support components, but you can't, it's very difficult to replace some of those fundamental elements.
Yeah, I feel like there is a blend to it, and there is a perfect blend somewhere. And if you have a remote or a virtual office that you're working with, you happen to be the internal group, you do want to work with an office that has networks and contacts that are different from your own, for example. That's a large part of what we do. But I don't think I would be really concerned with an entirely virtual office, because I think you might find a pipeline that dried up relatively quick.
Yeah, and you'd lose almost control or management of the channels through which your academics are going, because they just do it all themselves, perhaps.
And what we do is entirely for the surface of the research that's coming through and the academics.
Absolutely. Okay, Aditya, I think I've asked Sarah all my difficult questions.
And if you have other questions, please do type them in the chat box. We are running a bit out of time, but we might have time for another one or two. If not, we are going to answer the questions that you ask from now onwards. And if you have others, please do come back to us with all your questions. But if you keep on typing in the chat box, we will reply to your answers, to your questions, answer them in the follow-up email to this webinar. But I think this has been a very good opportunity to come together with questions and ideas, and thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and your worries, your uncertainties and perspectives on delivering remote technology transfer activities. If you have any questions related to technology transfer, Accenture is here. We are fully functioning. Do drop us an email at info@accenture.com, and look out for the recording of this webinar, which you can share with your colleagues. And we hope to host many more webinars in the upcoming months. And thank you very much, Tim and Sarah, for this opportunity.
No,
thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Tim. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And I'm sure we'll see you soon on a Zoom camera near you.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good day, everyone.